Who is this stranger I encounter on my screen?
Where? Where is he?
Seriously, who are you? I've never seen you before in my life.
I'm Bill Wadman.
Wow, hello, Bill Wadman.
How are
I'm
you?
in conversation with you. I'm Sandi Robertson. People might not
How?
remember.
It's been so long. It's been 3 whole weeks.
In fact, I might ask the question, who am I?
Who are you? That's a good question. Who are you?
Do you have any clue whatsoever?
Are we anything more than our names? Because that's the answer somebody would give, right?
Well,
They would say, I am Sandy Robertson.
there are lots of fast and easy answers on this. So
Sure.
let's not do that.
Okay.
Instead, I do want us to think, who am I? What is it that makes me up?
And does that change over time?
Hmm. But really, can we ask ourselves, what is it that makes me up? I mean, again, super easy to say, oh, well, all my experiences make me up,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
I'm wondering about it. I spent some time 10 days ago at the Krishnamurti Centre, and I just by chance hadn't expected to be part of a dialogue group, but ended up being part of a dialogue group, which was fascinating because this is a group that meets online and that I didn't know, and who themselves had never met each other in person, or very few of them had. And we spoke across 3 days on this topic, who am I? And it's probably poor taste in one way to try and in any way convey to another person what has happened in a dialogue. But what did emerge was so fascinating to me when I looked for a long time and with each other, who am I? How much deception is involved in the self, how separating we are with ourselves or from ourselves, and also how confused we actually are.
Conscious deception towards other people, like acting as somebody you're not, that you know you're not actually, or internal deception.
Well, I think it might seem like it's an internal deception, but it's actually the former, where again, this is so obvious, it feels like I shouldn't even say it. We do all behave differently, slightly differently, at least, depending on who we interact with, and our relationships
Sure.
can seem as if they're formative for the self,
Hmm.
but really they're a scaffold for the selves we sort of put on.
Yeah.
And so we were really looking at the kind of duality that springs up between believing ourselves to be separated as heart and mind, or as the ego self and like the aware self, the other self that's tucked in behind the ego somehow.
Hmm.
And to look at that was challenging. Now, I know that this is not for everybody. This is for some people just inane navel gazing. But if I could say there was one thing that was important about it, it was this feeling I'm describing of it being, you know, to allow deception to fall away and to then be able to observe what is, who am I? Anyway,
It, it's interesting though that even the first silly answer you said, the experiences answer, even if you go with that, you're actually not your experiences. You're sort of the reaction you have to your experiences to some extent. It's like a secondary effect.
yeah, I mean we are constantly in reaction, aren't we?
Yeah. I
Is
mean,
there
I
any,
have a go ahead.
is there any time when we're not in reaction, Bill?
No. Well, maybe when we first wake up and don't know where we are.
Aren't we
That sort of
still aren't we still
Oh, we're in
laboring?
a liminal state. I think you have a hard time sort of your brain does it without conscious reaction.
Hmm.
Um, but no, I don't think we are. I mean, I think everything is reactive. Um, is it not? I mean, is there another
It's
alternative?
self.
Yeah.
Say again, Bill, because we keep talking over each other. I say again.
Oh, I don't know. I can't imagine a situation where it is not your reaction to stimuli.
In which case, I would ask, who is reacting to stimuli?
I think that that version of the self is beyond the surface for which we can actually understand it. That even us discussing the concept of ourself and who we are is itself a translation of the reality, right? I wonder, I honestly wonder whether you can actually get an honest answer to the question.
Well, I think these kinds of questions maybe don't need like the answer in the way that we think of question and answer. That is it not enough that we are asking? And even just letting that question sort of float in the space between us. I know
Yeah.
for you that's really woo-woo, but I'm looking at how we give credence to the self, but beyond its self-fulfillment, it's not something else, but who am I? Myself is a construct. Myself
Hmm.
is something that is cumulative and reactive, as you say.
Yeah.
But when I'm observing that, who is observing?
Do you think that the person that I see you as is has any relation to the person you feel that you are inside?
I'm not sure it's relevant, is it?
I mean, if you can't project yourself outwardly, if that translation is impossible, then what does it matter what your self is inside?
I suspect there are many people who actually don't think it's important to know the self.
Yeah. Yeah.
Over all people, all times, even all religion, actually, there is some kind of element of this question.
Yeah.
Know thyself.
And that is there's a quote. I think it's a Benjamin Franklin quote I actually use in my script. It's something along the lines of, "There are three things that are hard: rocks, diamonds, and to know oneself."
Hmm.
Um,
Love how you managed to shoehorn in there about your script, Bill. Do you want to
well,
tell?
I'm just no, I'm just saying if anybody
You want
ever
to
hears
tell
it,
us
they'll
about
say,
it?
"Wait a minute, did he have that before or after?" No, I had to look it up, but it's true. I think that I think it's a certain kind of person who even cares.
And look at those of us who rush to judge them and what it is that rushes to judge and what it is that is judged. Who is the self? What is the self? Who am I? Anyway, the person I've put for us this evening is somebody who was self-obsessed, one might say, the ultimate it girl, the Countess Castiglione, aka
Mm,
Virginia Oldoini, Italian, married into wealth. She came from a wealthy family herself. But what's interesting about her here is how cleverly and carefully she curated her image over her lifetime.
uh, yes, I mean it's funny that this picture and it feels very modern somehow, despite the fact that it was taken, 160 years ago. Uh, Obviously the technology and the clothes and everything, but it feels very like selfie generation to me.
Well, ultimate selfie. I mean, this woman had, I mean, bearing in mind again the context of the 19th century, about 700 known images made of her.
Yeah.
And also often at her kind of behest, she was photographed all the time by this person, Pierre-Louis Pearson, in Paris. She,
She
as
have a
a,
relationship with him?
I'm not sure about that one. I do know that she had an affair with the king
Okay.
back in Italy. She had an affair with Napoleon III,
Okay.
and
Classic.
she was actually caught up in a kind of espionage where an assassination attempt, failed assassination attempt on Napoleon's life happened outside her apartment, and she was, I think, a suspect, and so the affair ended, or somehow she was implicated in that, and so she was discarded by him, ejected from French society, went back to Italy. Her husband, the Count, was really pissed off about all of this,
Yeah.
threatened divorce. I mean, she's quite a fascinating lady. I would look her up if you can, if people are watching and don't know who she is. She really is an interesting character. And context of our question, who am I?
Yeah.
It's very difficult, I think, to get to know somebody the more you know about them.
You said she carefully curated her image. Is that the term you used? I don't remember exactly.
Yeah,
Do
probably.
you think that that is a good indicator of herself, or do you think that that is all just a superficial put on?
I think that there is always an element of truth in everything, isn't there?
Sure.
Isn't there?
Yes, but I also think that the more somebody wants to be seen, the less they actually know who they are.
Well, I mean, putting this into the picture, she was um she was considered to be the most beautiful woman of her time. She was fated by many men. She had many lovers. She was a regular on the kind of party circuit. She was widely known. She was highly literate, highly educated, extraordinarily intelligent, multilingual, and so on and so on and so on. This is an
Hmm.
extraordinary woman. Even though all of those things are like remaining legacy of her is often through photographs. What's
Yeah.
interesting is the photographs of her invariably have been so tightly controlled by her that the photographs themselves become just a small part of a wider kind of issue or question, I think, that surrounds this person. This personage of great wit and skill is endlessly fascinating in the fact that she curated her image at a
Yeah.
time when image had a different currency. Anyway,
Okay. Let me ask you a question though. You say that she's this great person. She was, smart and educated and did all these things, but it seems like all the things that she did were just like rich people things. Like she's going to parties and sleeping with people and writing letters and whatnot, right?
yeah.
Did she do anything beyond like her just being her?
Well, you could say that her affair was instrumental in the unification of Italy, so I would say she is quite important, actually.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Um,
But that was probably not intentional.
I don't know, and that's the point. This kind of emissary role that
This is scandalous, by the way. This picture's scandalous. I don't know about this pornography that you have here.
I do just want to make a point about how important this woman is to European history and
Hmm.
what a travesty it is that so few people seem to know her. And that's not because she was the Kim Kardashian of her age. It's because actually there are substantial political changes afoot in her lifetime that possibly were connected to her, that maybe
Yes.
even were instigated by her. And that to me is not just a kind of inconsequential element of this person's life as a wealthy woman. This
Right.
is a fundamental aspect of Who is she? Who am I? Who is she?
Yeah.
Do I know myself through my image, through my actions, through my relationships, my reactions? I wonder when I look at her, and there's a lot of her to look at, there's any sense of knowing, any clue to who she really is. What am I bringing to what I know of her? In as much as what do I bring to myself to help me understand who I am?
I think that if you were back then and met her, she'd be far less interesting than we make her out to be now. Because sometimes the mystery becomes even more of a device, you
I'm
know?
sorry, Bill. I think that this is a kind of, dare I say it, I think this is a kind of misogynistic trap.
No, absolutely not. I don't. It doesn't matter to me that she's female. I'm just saying that like that it's because we don't know that it makes it interesting, right? To
No,
some extent.
but things that we do know, and this is where I
Hmm.
think we're very poor judges, is that we actually do know lots of facts about this woman. This woman meticulously diarized her entire life. I have to say that upon her death, she'd by this point returned to Paris and been re-accepted by Parisian high society. Um, I mean, she had descended into a kind of madness in her older age, and she died at 62, so she wasn't very, very old. She had an
It's not very
apartment
old
at
at
the
all. Yeah.
she had an apartment at the Place Vendôme. She was had been, of course, very wealthy, very well known. She practically bankrupted her actual husband because of all the dresses she bought to go to parties and balls.
Right.
But nonetheless, when she died, apparently a lot of her diaries were deliberately removed and burned and destroyed because they contained so much sensitive information, and that is not
Sure.
the hallmark of a woman who is vacuous and inconsequential. Um, and though you might say, well, she would probably be much less interesting than we can make her out to be, I would say that maybe we should champion how much more interesting this woman is than anybody tells us. Who am I? Who is she?
Do you think she knew who she was?
I think what's fascinating is that she was wise enough to realize that the camera was an extraordinary instrument for recording an aspect of self. And that she went as far as to doctor images herself and to make sure that any image that was created of her would have really, really specific instructions written about how to reproduce that image over time tells
Hmm.
me that though we could assume that, like the rest of us mortals, she grapples with the question, who am I? It's still so obvious to me that she had a very clear plan for who she could be to other people.
Or a very clear plan on how she could be perceived by other people.
Fine, yes.
Um, I guess I don't disagree with the facts. I disagree necessarily that we know the motivations.
Well, I mean, she was extremely vain. She had
Yeah.
been told from childhood that she was mind-blowingly beautiful.
Yes.
She had come from privilege. She had been celebrated. I mean, there's all kinds of accounts of her meeting the wives of heads of state, for example, and in their diaries, we can corroborate how fantastically beautiful she was. For example, I can't remember who it was, but it was someone like the Queen of Belgium at the time, if there was a
Yeah.
Queen of Belgium, wrote in her diary that she was mind blown by the beauty of this woman. And then there's a little bit
Yeah.
underneath that apparently says something, but after some time she becomes quite annoying. And I thought,
Yes.
yes, that self-obsession Is
Isn't it interesting though that you were saying though that she was told since childhood that she was so beautiful, she came from money, blah 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 blah. How much of our sense of self is fed to us when we're young, you know, and that ossifies, it solidifies into some sort of sense that we then take over as individuals once we sort of come to adulthood and we sort of ride down that. Because, you know, there could have been some woman who was twice as beautiful who was poor and lived in Sicily who no one ever saw because she didn't come from money,
sure.
who thought that she was crap her whole life, you know. Um, like how much of it is the input affects the output. It's fascinating to me. And how
Do
much you can put English on the ball. Do they use that term in England, or is that only
I don't know what
an
you're talking.
Amer if if you put a spin on a ball, like in the air, like a tennis ball or a billiard ball, you say you're putting English on the ball. I don't know where that comes from. Maybe English players used to do that, or they, whatever, were known to cheat that way or something. Who knows? Anyway, uh, but it's just like how much all of that can affect the self, and therefore the way you present yourself and how you see yourself, and even that thing inside, even if it's irrelevant to the way that other people perceive you or the way that you present yourself, the sort of um, unarmored, you know, very sensitive thing in the middle of it can be affected by that.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Do
What does
you?
this say? Do you read French? I don't read French.
I just want to ask you, Bill, do you have an unarmored sensitive center?
Oh God, yes. The problem is that it's much closer to the surface than for some people, I think.
But isn't that in itself reactive? So that sensitive center suggests perhaps that you are keenly aware of of this.
Hmm.
But is that sensitive center, the unguarded center, in that keen awareness, is there any awareness left? What I mean is that if you're perceiving from that center,
Hmm.
and the world can be easy or harsh, whatever it is,
Hmm.
surely we armor ourselves up again quickly.
I, I think that sure, and you know, I've spent many years trying to remove those layers of armor, but I think that this is the price we pay. This is the trade-off. You know,
For
the
what?
more the just that you know you can. I think that you can live with all of that very close to the surface, but the downside of that is that the outside can affect the inside, or you can live with that inside that internal identity buried really deeply, but then often then the outside never really gets to know the inside. You know, it's basically the. Go
Fragmentary.
ahead.
It sounds to me that that is fragmentary, and that, we're always separating of
Sure,
ourselves. I mean, that's what the self does. The self fragments. The self declares parts of oneself, parts of another.
sure.
We relate to each other as fragments, which is horribly problematic.
I would. I mean, I know that's the term people use. I would use the term facets. So it's the same thing. It's just that you're seeing different sides of it.
No, I'm maybe not using it in a kind of common vernacular way. I don't know, but I mean
Okay.
actually fragmentary. The fragment of myself that I choose to wield to communicate or react up against you with
Hmm.
means that I don't know you. I can't know you. And I mean, actually, it really suggests that I don't know myself. Or
True.
if I do, I can only do so through the kind of deconstruction of everything I know.
Yes, that's what I was kind of getting at the beginning of all this. Yeah. Ah, Krishnamurti.
Well, I did say that I was there the other week, and this was the topic that we were inquiring into.
All right, read this, please. I like hearing your voice read these things.
Well, I want to always say before I do that, that of course, hearing my voice read it adds another layer of the fragmentary self to even
True.
the perception of this. Anyway, by the self, I mean the idea, the memory, the conclusion, the experience, the various forms of nameable and unnameable intentions, the conscious endeavor to be or not to be, competition, the accumulated memory of the unconscious, the racial, the group, the individual, the clan, the whole of it, whether projected outwardly in action or projected spiritually as virtue. The whole process of that is the self. And we know actually when we are faced with it that it is an evil thing. I am using the word evil intentionally because the self is dividing. It is self-enclosing, its activities, however noble, are separative and isolating. We know all this. We also know those extraordinary moments when the self is not there, in which there is no sense of endeavour, of effort, and which happens when there is love.
Yeah. I mean, I I agree with the last part, but I don't think that it's that the self isn't there. I think it's that we forget about ourselves.
Sure, but again, I'm kind of looking at this as if without intention to do it, I can somehow drop the act. I mean, to desire to drop the act of oneself is just as full
Sure.
of self as
Well,
any other action.
right, which is why I think when it actually happens, it's not by choice. And I
Sure.
think that actually tells you when there's actual moments of love, right?
Hmm. I mean, all these words are sticky words in that we could take each of these words out and dialogue for days about,
Sure.
what they are.
Sure. I mean, you know, I we were talking earlier, but I experienced a death in the family recently, and I was there, and you could say in the moments that it happened, I wasn't thinking about myself. I wasn't thinking about any self, right? Because we were somewhere else more important that was between all of us, you know? Um, yeah,
Anyway, who am I and who are you, Bill?
you're Sandy Robertson on Bill Wadman.
And what the hell are we doing?
We're speaking of seeing.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Bill.